today we begin with Canto 3. Canto 3 begins in a very dramatic way with a piece of prosopopoia. Very difficult word, difficult to spell. Prosopopoia. Always leave the po out. Prosopopoia. What that means is an inanimate object speaks. In Old English literature, there's a little piece of jewelry, a famous archaeological find from the Anglo-Saxon period. It's a pin or brooch, and on the brooch it says in Old English, King Alfred had me made. So that's prosopopoia. The brooch is speaking to you. King Alfred had me made, you know. So this canto begins with the gate to the Inferno actually speaking to the reader. And what it says is pretty frightening. Per me si va nella città dolente, per me si va nell'eterno dolore, per me si va tra la perduta gente. So this is called anaphora, beginning the first line of a sentence or a line of verse with the same word or words. Through me the way, through me the way, through me the way. Very frequently used in political speeches, you know. What do we need to do? Blah, blah, blah. What do we need to do? Blah, blah, blah. Right? It's a common rhetorical device called anaphora. So one of the things if you're thinking about your journals, and you should be thinking about your journals now, you should have written at least one entry by now and be thinking about another one. One of the things you could think about is how Dante begins his cantos. He has various ways of opening a canto. Sometimes it's someone speaking. Sometimes it's a simple description. Sometimes it's a beautiful simile. Here it's prosopopoia, right? It's an inanimate object speaking. So through me the way to the suffering city. Notice that Dante conceives of hell as a city. We talked about that, right? Dante, like Virgil, like other writers of the ancient and medieval world, saw human beings in society. Even the damned, even those in hell, have a kind of community. It's an anti-community. It's a city which is totally in opposition to the city of God, right? The heavenly Jerusalem, the community of heaven. But it's still a kind of city. Through me the way to the eternal pain, through me the way that runs among the lost, those who have lost their chance of happiness. Justice urged on my high artificer, my maker was divine authority, the highest wisdom, and the primal love. Well, as we'll see in a few moments, those are the three persons of the Christian Trinity, right? The authority is the Father, the wisdom is the Son, and the love is the Holy Spirit. So, rather surprisingly for modern readers, hell was created by God. So that raises a question we'll talk about on the PowerPoint. When we get to the PowerPoint, you know, how can a good God create a place like hell? How can that be explained? Before me nothing but eternal things were made, and I endure eternally. Well, according to Christian thought, the first thing that was created were the heavens and the angels. And then Satan rebelled against God, and hell was created as a place for Satan. This was before human beings were created, right? Think of your Milton, Paradise Lost. He tells about the revolt in heaven, and then God creates Adam and Eve. Why? According to traditional theological explanation, so that human beings could make up for the number of angels who rebelled against God. So sort of complete the number of original inhabitants of heaven. So before me, nothing but eternal things were made, meaning human beings weren't made before hell. Hell came first as a place of punishment for Satan. Then human beings were created, according to traditional theology, to make up for the loss of angels that occurred during Satan's rebellion against God. And I endure eternally. So of the three stages of Dante's journey, hell, purgatory, and heaven, only two of those realms, I don't know what you want to call them, those territories, will exist eternally. Purgatory will be finished. Once all of the souls have climbed the mountain, at the end of the world there'll be no need for purgatory anymore, so that kingdom will vanish. But hell and heaven will remain forever. And of course the famous line, lasciate ogni speranza voi c'entrate. Abandon all hope. And then, because of the meter or something, he leaves out the pronoun. But I think you should put it in, you who enter here. Abandon all hope, every hope, you who enter here. So hell is permanent. There's no, that's a big difference between the Chinese or Buddhist concept of hell and the Christian concept of hell. In the Buddhist concept of hell, no matter how bad you are, how many thousands of years you have to spend in hell, you eventually have a chance of getting out, but not in Dante's hell. This is forever, right? The place that corresponds to the Buddhist hell in Christian theology is purgatory. There you may spend thousands of years and eventually you'll get out. Of course, not to be reborn, but to go to heaven. But in hell, there's no hope. Abandon every hope, you who enter here. These words, their aspect was obscure. Oscuro can mean, they were dark. The actual color of the words on the gate was dark, or they were difficult to understand, obscure in that sense. I read inscribed above a gateway. And I said, Master, their meaning is difficult for me. So obviously difficult there has more than one meaning. It means, I can't understand them, but also means they frighten me, especially that last line, abandon all hope, ye who enter here. You see that, it'd be like being out hiking and seeing a sign that says, weapons training ground, enter at your own risk or something. You say, wow, I'm not going in there, a very dangerous place. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. And he to me, as one who comprehends, here one must leave behind all hesitation. Here every cowardice must meet its death. For we have reached the place of which I spoke, where you will see the miserable people, those who have lost the good of the intellect. Now you have to stop and think. The intellect, that's what separates human beings from animals. We have the ability to think. We have reason, right? So what is the good of the human being's ability to think? Well, Aristotle, at the beginning of the Ethics, says the good of every human being, the ultimate good of every human being is to know. So knowledge is the good of the intellect. And this is the way that Virgil describes what's been lost by those who are separated from God. For medieval theology, the good of the intellect is knowledge of God. I think I've said this before. When Dante gets to heaven, there are no women, there's not a lot of music, there isn't a lot of eating and drinking. It's knowledge. That's the reward. You have perfect knowledge. And for Dante, that was what makes human beings different from animals. We have this desire to know, right? The good of every human being is to know. So Virgil, he doesn't say, they've lost salvation, they've lost the chance to get into heaven. He says they've lost the good of the intellect, which in his philosophy was the closest he could come to the idea of salvation. They've lost their chance for salvation. They've lost their chance to be in the presence of God, to know God, and therefore to know truth. And when with gladness on his face, he placed his hand upon my own to comfort me, He drew me in among the hidden things. The first, of course, description then of hell itself, here sighs and lamentations and loud cries were echoing across the starless air, so that as soon as I set out, I wept. Strange utterances, horrible pronouncements, accents of anger, words of suffering, and voices shrill and faint and beating hands, all went to make a tumult in that will whirl forever through that turbid, timeless air, like sand that eddies when a whirlwind swirls. So the first impression of hell is absolute chaos, right? Noise, wind, lamentation. And then looking behind them, I could see a crowd along the bank of a great river, at which I said, "Allow me now to know, who are these people, Master, and what law has made them seem so eager for the crossing, as I can see, despite the feeble light?" Well, if you read Book 6 of the Aeneid, which would be a good supplementary reading, you can get that on the internet quite easily in English. That's the book where Aeneas visits the underworld, and Dante is following it here very closely. He sees the bank of the river, which is the Acheron, and he sees the souls clustered on the bank, waiting to be ferried over into hell proper. And he to me, when we have stopped along the melancholy shore of Acheron, now we get the name of the river, this is the classical river that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. When we have stopped along the melancholy shore of Acheron, then all these matters will be plain to you. So you've already got, if you're tracing the relationship between Virgil and Dante, the personal relationship between the two characters, you've got a kind of nice contrast there. Because, first he puts his hand on my own, he puts his hand on Dante's own to comfort me. So he's, the concerned, loving guide and teacher. But then when the student asks a question that Virgil doesn't want to answer at this point, he gets slapped down. I'm coming to that later in my lecture. When we have stopped along the melancholy shore of Acheron, then all these matters will be plain to you. And then poor Dante at that, with eyes ashamed, downcast, and fearing that what I'd said had given him offense, I did not speak until we reached the river. And here, advancing towards us in a boat, an aged man, his hair was white with years, was shouting, "Woe to you, corrupted souls! Forget your hope of ever seeing heaven. I come to lead you to the other shore, to the eternal dark, to fire and frost." Well, again, here is, a traditional inhabitant of the underworld. This is Charon, the ferryman, who takes the souls across the river into the world of the afterlife. And you, approaching there, you living soul. So interestingly, this is something I'm trying to do some research on right now, actually, how various characters in the Inferno either recognize or do not recognize that Dante is a living soul. I had a student a couple of years ago wrote a journal entry. She said, her question was, is Virgil naked? Did I tell you about this already? Yes. Yeah. So, how? He obviously sees Dante's wearing clothes he shouldn't be coming, because, when you die, you go to afterworld absolutely naked, just like when you're born, right? So he recognized immediately Dante is alive. He doesn't have any problem. Later, some of the souls will not know that he's alive, and I can't understand, the student couldn't understand how that could be. And you approaching there, you living soul, keep well away from these, they are the dead. But when he saw I made no move to go, he said, another way and other harbors, not here, will bring you passage to your shore. A lighter craft will have to carry you. So that's kind of a neat passage because it confuses. What's he talking about? A lighter craft? This is not the right place. Virgil will explain in just a few lines. What it means is Dante is predicting his own salvation. He will not be crossing the river Acheron with Charon. He will be on a boat that goes from the mouth of the river Tiber, in Dante's imagination, to the shores of the mountain of Purgatory, and then he will be climbing Purgatory, and then he's on his way to heaven. So one of the many indications that Dante was planning, we hope it happened, to enter heaven, not to go to hell. He came close to going to hell, remember, in the dark wood, but he thinks that through this journey he's been rescued. So, a lighter craft. My guide then, Virgil. Charon, don't torment yourself. Our passage has been willed above, where one can do what he has willed and ask no more. So this is not just a casual, touristical expedition. This is a God-willed journey. God has allowed this, right? If you look at the Italian, it's almost like a magic spell. It's like a way that you can get, a door to open in Dungeons and Dragons, Vuol si così colà dove si può ciò che si vuole e più non dimandare. Vuol si così colà dove si può ciò che si vuole e più non dimandare. So it's very sort of sonorous. It has a very sort of strong rhythm to it. It's like a magic password, as it were, that gets them in. Now silence fell upon the woolly cheeks, he's got a beard, of Charon, pilot of the livid marsh, whose eyes were ringed about with wheels of fire. But all those spirits, naked and exhausted, had lost their color, and they gnashed their teeth as soon as they heard Charon's cruel words. They execrated, cursed God and their own parents, and humankind, and the place and time of their conception, seed, and of their birth. Then they foregathered, huddled in one throng, weeping aloud along that wretched shore that waits for all who have no fear of God. The demon Charon, with his eyes like embers, by signaling to them, has them all embark, get onto the boat. His oar strikes any who stretches out. And then we get this beautiful simile. As in the autumn leaves detach themselves, first one and then another, till the bough sees all its fallen garments on the ground. Similarly, the evil seed of Adam descended from the shoreline, one by one, when signaled, as a falcon called, will come. So the image there is of hunting with a falcon, which is a large bird of prey, something like an eagle. And it's a very common sport in the Middle Ages. And you take your falcon out, and you release your falcon. The falcon goes up and catches some kind of bird in the sky, and then you whirl a string that has some feathers on it and a bit of meat to call the falcon to come back. Now you can't see falconry in Beijing, but you can see birds like this. If you go right over to the Participark, over west of the campus, there are old guys there that have these trained birds. Have you seen this? And they shoot. They have like a tube, and they shoot a seed up into the sky, and the bird flies up and catches the seed. And then if they're lucky, it comes back and sits back on their little stick that they have there. But I've seen these guys lose their bird or fly over to the tree, and then they go over there and they're whistling, and they're trying to call the bird back. So you can see something. It's pretty neat. I've never seen falcons, but I can see how it works now. So in any case, so do they move, so do the souls move across the darkened waters. Even before they reach the farther shore, new ranks already gather on this bank. My son, the gracious master said to me, those who have died beneath the wrath of God, all these assemble here from every country, and they are eager for the river crossing, because celestial justice spurs them on. So the damned actually want to go to hell. Why? Well, it's their natural place. You can go back and see that in terms of Aristotle's idea of natural place. Having turned their back on God and the good, their natural place in the universe is as far away from God as they can get. So in a sense, it's not just that they're forced to go, but they actually want to go. That's where they'll be at home, as it were, having decided to turn their back on what is good. No good soul ever takes its passage here. Therefore, if Charon has complained of you, by now you can be sure what his words mean. So there's the explanation that, Dante won't be coming this way when he dies. And after this was said, the dark and plain quaked so tremendously The memory of terror then bathes me in sweat again. A whirlwind burst out of the tear-drenched earth, a wind that crackled with a blood-red light, a light that overcame all of my senses, and like a man whom sleep has seized, I fell. So Dante doesn't actually describe the trip over the river Acheron. He passes out, and then on the other side he wakes up. Why? Well, from the point of view of literature, from the point of view of the story, because he's going to describe another crossing of a river later, the crossing of the river Styx, in a boat with a boatman, Phlegius, and he probably doesn't want the repetition of two crossings of a river, right? But theologically, probably the explanation is that you don't, as a living person, get into the Christian hell in a boat. It's got to be something like a miracle. And so he passes out, and when he wakes up, he's on the other side. So he doesn't get into the boat with Charon and be rowed across the river. So a kind of dramatic ending to that canto. Okay, let's look at a few things on the PowerPoint. So why did God create hell? This was a question that we were just talking about. The inscription on Hell's Gate clearly indicates that the three-person Christian God, who is, according to theology, infinitely good, created hell. But how could that be? How could a good God create a place like hell? Well, the answer involves some of the most difficult to accept logic in medieval theology. So here's the argument. First of all, God gave human beings free will. This is, Dante says in Paradiso, he also says in Convivio, this is the greatest gift that God gave to human beings, free will. It means that we're not victims of instinct or physical law. We can actually choose our own course of action. So, material things, if I drop these glasses, which I won't because I might break them, they have no choice, right? They can't say, will I drop or not drop? No. Just automatic physical necessity. Animals, in the same way, are governed by instinct. Plants too, but animals are a better example. So, if you take your dog to the veterinarian to get a shot, and the dog has been to the veterinarian for a shot before, as soon as the dog sees the hypodermic needle, it tries to flee, right? It doesn't like going to the vet. It doesn't like the needle, Why? Because it hurts. But a human being can decide, I've got to have this shot, protect me against the serious disease. You go in, no problem. You don't try to run away usually. No problem, you get your shot. That's free will. That's free will. You're able to control your own course of action. So in the Paradiso, Dante says the greatest gift, the magnanimity, the generousness of God, as he created, gave the gift most suited to his goodness, the gift that he most prizes, was freedom of the will. Because of all the creatures in the universe, only God and the angels and human beings have this ability, right? All other things are simply operating either by physical necessity or by instinct. But if human beings have free will, they have the freedom to choose evil as well as to choose good. Now, evil is the absence of good. We'll talk about this too later. That's the theological idea. I mean, you have the choice to either go towards the good or go away from the good, ignore the good. Evil, in Christian theology, evil is not a positive force. It's simply an absence, like darkness is the absence of light. Evil is the absence of good. So you have a chance to choose evil or turn away from good. That's a logical consequence of having freedom of the will. And for those who turn away from the good, it's inevitable, unavoidable, that they'll be separated from the good. And therefore, there has to be a place far from the good and far from God. And that's hell. So that's a kind of explanation of the idea that, God creates hell. It's part of the necessity of the structure of the universe if there is free will. If creatures have free will, they have to have the possibility of a choice between good and evil. Here's prosopopoia. This was many years ago now. My wife and I were down at, this is Gugong, and they're always working on it down there. This was a sign on a fence, hoarding, surrounding a place they were renovating. And I should be able to translate the Chinese now. I'm not even going to try. I'm going to embarrass myself anyway. But the English translation, the ancient building is renovating. Excuse me for bringing trouble to you. It's like the building is apologizing. Excuse me for bringing trouble to you. So I thought that was so charming as an example of prosopopoia. Now I know a lot of you are translation students, and you're thinking, "Oh my God, it's not charming; it's horrible." But it's. I thought it was worth taking a picture of. Here's something on intertextuality. That's a fancy name for the fact that texts are often based on previously existing texts. There are sources, like for example, the source for Paradise Lost is the book of Genesis, right? The source for much of Dante's Inferno is book 6 of the Aeneid. So intertextuality, texts are based on previously existing texts. Let's look at that simile that I was saying was such a beautiful one about the souls gathering on the shore of the river Acheron. It actually goes all the way back to Homer, this simile. And during one of the battles in the Iliad, book 6, Glaucus, who's a Trojan warrior, is talking to Diomedes before they engage in battle. And Diomedes, of course, very, very powerful warrior, and Glaucus realizes he probably won't survive this battle. And so he says, very like leaves upon the earth are the generations of men, old leaves cast on the ground by wind, young leaves the greening forest bears when spring comes in. So mortals pass, one generation flowers, even as another dies away. So it's a beautiful simile, but it basically is just talking about the fact that human life doesn't last forever. Human beings last by having offspring, who then have offspring. We last from generation to generation, but individual human beings are like the leaves on the trees in the fall. And then the new generation is like the leaves in the spring. So then Virgil picks this up, and he's talking exactly about the situation Dante is talking about, that is the souls on the bank of the river Acheron gathering there to cross to the world of the dead. And he says, as many souls as leaves that yield their hold on boughs and fall through forests in the early frost of autumn, or as migrating birds from the open sea that darken heaven when the cold season comes and drives them overseas to sunlit lands. This is describing how many souls he sees on the bank of the river. So here we can see the original simile has been expanded and it's been adapted to fit the situation that Virgil is describing. Birds have been added, right? Not just leaves, now it's birds. As with the leaves and the birds, the summer of the souls' lives is over. They're about to enter the winter of the underworld. The fluttering movement of the souls is vividly depicted by the corresponding fluttering of the leaves and the birds. And of course the multitude, all of the people who die are going to the river bank. And that's like the multitude of leaves in the fall. I mean, walk on the Bay Dock campus in the fall, right? Just leaves everywhere. Or the number of birds. And you have to be in a place where birds are migrating. But in the fall, if you're in a, what they call a migration corridor, just, huge flocks of birds going south in the fall. That's what Virgil's talking about. Uncountable number of birds. So then Dante picks this up and he uses, as in autumn, leaves detach themselves, first one and then the other, to the boughs. Sees all its fallen garments on the ground. Similarly, the evil seed of Adam descended from the shoreline one by one, when signaled as a falcon calls will come. So here now we get a bit of personification of the tree, who is dressed, with clothes. The clothes are the leaves, and it sees its clothes fallen on the ground, and there's a kind of emotion to the fact that the tree sees its garments. And then, of course, he makes a specific Christian or Judeo-Christian reference to the seed of Adam, the descendants of Adam, all of those who are subject to original sin, to the crime that Adam committed in the garden when he disobeyed God. All of them descend, and then he adds this, he gets the bird, but it's a different bird, right? He must have been inspired by the idea of the birds in Virgil, but here it's a falcon coming back to the lure. Just what I described to you of a falconer calling the bird back as the souls are drawn by desire to enter hell. And just I love this guy Guy Raffi. He has that website that I recommended the first day. He calls Dante seamless blend of adaptation and innovation. So this is the borrowing, adaptation, and this is what's new, innovation. And for him, it's hard to tell where the borrowing and where the innovation, where one stops and where the other begins. But this is something you have to get used to if you study traditional literature. Really study any literature, but it's more obvious in traditional literature. I remember teaching the Virgil class back in Canada when I first started teaching Virgil. And I have a lot of students come up and they say, well, but isn't Virgil just kind of a bad imitation of Homer? I say, no, it's equally good, and I try to convince them. But the idea that, because something is an imitation or because something draws on a previous text, somehow it's no good. This is an idea that develops in the 19th century, with the Romantic movement, the idea of absolute originality. Everything has to be new. But it's never been that way. Even the Romantics were intertextual, and certainly the traditional authors like Virgil and Dante and Milton and Shakespeare, Chaucer, could go on. For the sake of completeness, let's look at a Milton passage. Here's Paradise Lost, first book. Satan stood and called his legions angel forms who lay in trance. This is when they're on the burning lake. Thick as autumnal leaves that strew the brooks in Vallombrosa, where the Etrurian shades high overarched in bower, roar. Milton goes on forever, these sentences. Couldn't quote it all, it would be way down here somewhere. But there, is the image again. It's Satan summoning his fallen army of angels who lie stunned on the lake after being cast out of heaven. And then, of course, you get one of the greatest poems, certainly the greatest poem of revolution. Oh, wild west wind, thou breath of autumn's being, thou from whose unseen presence the leaves dead are driven, like ghosts from an enchanter fleeing, yellow and black and pale and hectic red, pestilence-stricken multitudes. Shelley's great ode to the west wind. So that's one of the great pleasures of studying a work like the comedy, is you can see not only how Dante draws on earlier texts, but also how later writers draw on Dante.